What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are here to recap day 2 of the Detroit Lions NFL Draft. So let's get it started. Welcome, everybody, to our video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, we're here with our recap, our quick recap of the Detroit Lions day 2 picks that they made, man. These are just my initial reactions to these picks. Of course, gonna do breakdowns on all of the players that we drafted after the draft, but this is just kind of my initial thoughts, my initial reactions now that the rounds have ended today, round 2 and round 3. We're gonna be live tomorrow as well for day 3 of the NFL Draft, and we'll talk about those picks that the Lions make as well. And I know I didn't do one of these videos after day 1, but that's because we were doing that show yesterday. Shout out to everybody that was in there, man, and shout out to everybody that was in the stream today. So this is going to be focused on these picks that the Lions made in day 2, not day 1. Okay, we talked about that to open our stream today. Feel free to go check that out, and we'll definitely talk about it more with Jack Campbell and Jahmyr Gibbs. And I think I'll touch on a couple of things as we go through that. Main point that I wanted to make about this entire draft class as a whole, to just kind of sum it up, that what we've done so far and kind of how I've approached looking at this year's draft for the Detroit Lions. And I think it was summed up really well in that Jerry Jones clips that we used during the live stream.
No profanity. It's 13 or 14 on our board. I mean, who gives a shit? Really, we got him.
And that was just like, who cares where we got him? We got him. And that's exactly the mindset that I feel like I've taken with this draft. Based on day 1, the decision to select Jack Campbell, to trade back and then land Jahmyr Gibbs, the movement around the board has been absolutely crazy at this point. I've absolutely loved it. But that's kind of how I look at this draft, because I think Brad hit it best. This is a different draft. Now, every draft is different. Every draft has strengths, it has weaknesses, but this one isn't your typical draft. Now, there was quarterbacks that were drafted at the top, but it's not your typical draft in the sense that usually you come in and you say, man, the receivers are loaded in this draft class, right? Defensive tackles into the first round, right? This is just a much different draft than a lot of years based on where the strengths of this draft was. And not only that, but also everybody kind of has their own flavor on what type of player that they like for their team. But specifically at some of those positions that are lighter, there wasn't a lot of those choices. So if you wanted a specific flavor, say for example at the linebacker position, there weren't a lot of options of that flavor. It was like, hey, you better take it when you can get it, because there's not a lot of those going around. And that's kind of how this draft feels. Now, sure, it's deeper at positions like tight end, for example. You see the depth of tight end today and how many tight ends went off the board. There are certain positions that are deep. Running back, I think you could argue, is a deep position. Cornerback, but there's also the positions like receiver and defensive tackle. This is different. This is really light. So it's like, hey, get your guys when you can. Linebacker, that falls into that category. And I think that's the case. And just a quick, brief little touch on these first 2 picks. I look at Jack Campbell like that. Jack Campbell's unique. There is no other Jack Campbell in this year's draft class. If that's the flavor that you're looking for a plug-in-and-play Mike linebacker, first off with that athleticism. The closest guy that I can think of that seems like a Jack Campbell is a Noah Sewell, but I don't see the same athleticism within Noah Sewell. Jack Campbell is one of one in this draft. So if you're looking for a guy with that size, 6'3", 245, Mike linebacker, but some versatility, if you're looking for that, you better take it when you can get it, because there's not a lot of that within this draft. I think a somewhat similar thing with Jahmyr Gibbs as well. Jahmyr Gibbs to me is the perfect number 2 to a David Montgomery. The Lions invested in David. They like David Montgomery, right? We like David Montgomery for this offense. But Jahmyr Gibbs was the perfect number 2 option, right? I like Bijan a lot. Bijan, best running back in the draft. I think he's more of a bell cow. He's the guy. The Atlanta Falcons got him. He's going to be the guy. But you have David Montgomery. What is a great change of pace number 2 that can bring that receiving upside, that just brings some of that electricity where it's like, hey, that guy gets the corner with ease. That was Jahmyr Gibbs. So really like the first 2 picks. And immediately right there, I had to say to myself, I don't really care where we take these players. It just comes down to what players we get, because that's just kind of how this draft is. And I think that's how it kind of should be looked at, because as Lions fans, the excitement was always, man, we have no needs, best player available. Well, if that's the case, then I'm not going to get upset about where you take a certain player. It just comes down to what players did you get. And I got to be honest, I like a lot of players that we got. So with that being said, let's move into day number 2, and we'll start off with the tight end out of Iowa, Sam LaPorta. Now, I'm going to try to fly through these guys. I'm not going to give a full breakdown on these players, but I've seen all of these players play that the Lions drafted today. These could change a little bit when I go back, rewatch them, and then also create a video on these players. Some I've watched more than others, and Sam LaPorta was a guy I've watched way back, so this one's been a little bit. But as I said during the live streams, there were two things that stuck with me when watching Sam LaPorta. There was one that was really good and one that wasn't so good. The thing that stuck with me, after all this time of watching Sam LaPorta, and it has not left my mind since that time, is the ability to make plays with the ball in his hands. Like, it was just, he didn't look right. He didn't look like a tight end with the ball in his hands. It looks special. You get this guy the ball, and he's just going to go to work. Make guys miss. He doesn't look like your typical tight end with the ball in his hands, and I think that is the trait that separates him. I think Tucker Kraft was a second to that in this draft class as a former running back, but Sam LaPorta was on another level in that sense. Now, being within that Iowa offense, which was kind of a disaster, he played all over the place, and I kind of get the sense of when, like, Trey McBride came out of Colorado State and how they used him in a lot of different alignments because he was the most talented player on that offense. That's kind of the sense that I got with Sam LaPorta. He was all over the place. He would line up wide, slot, tight end. You put him all over the place. You'd use him in motion. You get him the ball on screens. You try to isolate him on a linebacker. You'd put him all over the place. But where he was at his best to me, and it stood out immediately, was get the ball in the guy's hands. I remember the first game I watched with South Dakota State, and I was just like, oh my goodness. This is different. He is slippery with the ball in his hands. This is not how a tight end is supposed to look. That I didn't love was the ball skills. Lets the ball get up on him. Too many passes become contested because he doesn't just go out and pluck it. That was something, and even the pass catching technique I had questions about at the time. However, with this draft pick, if you just take a look at how we utilized our tight ends last year, if you take a look at what the LA Rams had when they drafted Tyler Higbee, then they came back, or they drafted Gerald Everett first, and then they came back and drafted Tyler Higbee. And what they had in those tight ends, the ability to catch and run, make plays with the ball in your hands. And I think James Mitchell gave us some of that. I think he gives us some of that. He looks like a running back when he's running with that football. But Sam LaPorta, I don't think there was one better in this class at that specific trait. Give him the ball and let him make things happen. I'm just thinking about a play-action play for a second where we run a play fake with either Jahmyr Gibbs or Dave Montgomery, probably Montgomery, and we have these speedsters on the outside and J-Mo and how he can affect coverage, and you have St. Brown underneath and all these things. But then guess what? You have that man Sam LaPorta with the little chip flat, and you just check it down to him. And no longer is it going to be, well, you know, whatever's there, he's going to pick up. Maybe that's 4 yards, but he'll get whatever's there. It is now going to turn into, all eyes got to be on that guy because he's going to make a couple of people miss in space. So all of a sudden, you got a weapon in an offense that, like every position, every team's going to have their certain flavor. But based on how we used our tight ends last year, the reason I love Tucker Kraft was for that run after catchability. I think Sam LaPorta is even better at that. So that's kind of my thoughts on that pick initially. Definitely someone I want to dive back into because it's been a little while. But man, the run after catch sticks with you. Now, continuing on to our next pick, which was the 14th pick of the second round, where the Lions moved up from pick 48, which was their original pick, up to 45, 3 spots with the Green Bay Packers to select Brian Branch, the slot corner / safety out of Alabama. This guy's only 21 years old, all right? Former 4-star recruit to Alabama. And oh my goodness, he is one of the best players in this draft class. And it just felt like one of those things, and I won't say it was like iffy, but I'm just saying when you just kept seeing the board and you're like, that guy's still available. He's still available. And at the time, always joke with Rad. Rad would always tell me this was the guy that he wanted. He wanted Jalen Petrie a couple years ago. He wanted Brian Branch. We signed C.J. Gardner-Johnson. I'm just like, Rad, no, we can't do that. It doesn't make sense, right? What are we going to do with this player? But that's a shame on me because, again, back to the original point, we are drafting best player available. And especially when you get into round 2 and that guy's still sitting there, you start to think to yourself, there's also a drop-off at safety. Safety's not very good either. But not even that. It's Brian Branch. Okay, it doesn't take much watching this guy to be like, oh, okay. I'm so excited to go back and rewatch this player and just go check out more of his catalog, more of the games that he played in, because it just doesn't take much. And you're like, this prospect's an absolute animal, because there's not really weaknesses. They're not things where you're like, that's a hole in his game. It's hard to find those within his game. I mean, sure, there's some little things that could probably be cleaned up within his game, but it's just like immediately, first off, he's a very good athlete, right? He ran a 4.56 40-yard dash, 14 bench press reps, 1.56 10-yard split, but he plays even faster on the field, similarly to like a Jack Campbell to me. Campbell doesn't have the best short area quickness, but his eyes are quick. His decisiveness, it makes him look quicker than maybe he is. Brian Branch has all of those things, and he's a really good athlete. Now the question is going to be, well, what's his role going to be year one? Is he going to be slot corner? I thought that was C.J. Gardner-Johnson. My answer would be, I don't know. And also, I don't really care at this point in time because we got an absolute animal on this defense. And we went from last year, like, what are we doing in the back end, to all of a sudden, we have a very smart, back 7, right? When you get beyond this defensive line, not to say that our defensive front players aren't smart, but Jack Campbell, that's an immediate plug in and play, FBI intelligent. He's going to know exactly what he's got to do when he steps in there. This is exactly what Brian Branch is and what he brings to the table for now and for the future. This is a plug-and-play, high-floor defender that is going to communicate. He's going to jump routes. He's going to be a problem for defenses that can align in multiple spots. You could play him split safety. You could play him as a deep safety. You could leave him in a slot role like he played. You could probably move him all over the place. C.J. Gardner-Johnson, because of his physicality, will probably allow you to do that. But this is a guy you saw it from off-man coverage with slot receivers. It looked natural. It didn't look like that's a safety play, and I can tell. He looked like a cornerback. The fluidity, the change of direction. My favorite part is the control at which he moved. Look, you get a lot of guys that can anticipate route breaks and try to undercut routes, but then all of a sudden, they may take one wrong step or the route breaks a little bit differently. There's a little bit more to it than they initially thought, and they're running by the play, they're grabbing, they're holding on to things, especially for slot receivers when you ask a safety to match up in that position. But not Brian Branch. He not only has the awareness and the sense of when routes are going to break and how to undercut routes and be a playmaker, but also he does it with so much control, so much fluidity in his hips, the ability to sink, stop, start. He looks like a running back doing those types of things. And you see he doesn't overrun routes. He just sinks, resets, and he's there. It's just like, it's so clean, where even when it's like maybe not the best break and he thought it was going to be this, it's so clean. The guy doesn't miss tackles. That's another thing. I mean, he just doesn't miss tackles. Now, he could turn into a guy that sometimes he gets a little high, but he doesn't miss tackles. I mean, you'll see it when he's matching routes, not only the anticipation, but also at the same time, as soon as that route starts to break, he just takes the great angles to be a playmaker, not just to sit there and tackle and limit yak. He wants to be a playmaker on the football. Same thing in zone, the awareness, fast eyes. He's just a football player, man. It's like Cam Sutton, who we signed this offseason. It's a smart football player that's going to know where to be. He's going to be a playmaker. And all of a sudden, you just have a whole bunch of playmakers walking around on that defense that can switch off routes, that can communicate, that are extremely versatile. You have Cam Sutton, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, and Brian Branch. I'm not even talking about the other guys right now. You have those 3 guys in your secondary that could all be out there at the same time. With Tracy Walker, who we know is versatile, with Kirby Joseph, who's an absolute ball hawk. I mean, it's like, this is disgusting. Teams that like to put guys in a slot, try to find their matchups. Or we're going to get him on a linebacker. We're going to put him on a safety, right? We're going to attack the zone, right? We're going to put Justin Jefferson in the slot. Well, now we have an answer for that. His name is Brian Branch. Oh, yeah, and I forgot about Iffy. I mean, the guy that can match up with tight ends, as if Brian Branch couldn't already do that. I mean, this is Brian Branch. How did we even land this guy? I don't know, but we did it. Continuing on, we got 2 more picks. And this next one, I'm going to try not to spend too much time on. His name is Hendon Hooker, and that's a quarterback out of Tennessee. And the way that which we got this player is what makes this so amazing. The fact that we traded back twice, we just kept moving back. It's like, okay, let's move back again. Let's move back again. And we were still able to land Hendon Hooker. It got to the point where we got to that draft pick, and I was just like, I don't even know who the guy is on this board at the top of my board. I don't even know where you go with this pick. I don't know where you go with this pick. There's no one that stands out except for Hendon Hooker because he's still there for some reason. And the Lions took him. And I think this works out great for both sides. It's not like you took a first-round quarterback and now it's like, oh gosh, this is the replacement. Not necessarily. He was very arguably so the last quarterback on the board that I think could legitimately down the road become a future starter. Like, I really liked Aiden O'Connell, and I thought maybe he could be in that category, but this one is much more clear that he is in that category. Yes, he's an older prospect. He's 25. But how many prospects that are going to go in this next day that you're going to see that are not 24 years old? Majority of them are older prospects. They played a lot, right? The only guy that's not is really Tanner McKee. And Tanner McKee, to me, is not on the same level as a guy like Hendon Hooker whatsoever. Coming off the ACL injury, potentially create some leverage down the road, maybe give you a future option down the road. But I think at very worst, I view this as a really good backup quarterback, right? So, and it's a 3rd-round pick. It's not like you used a 1st-round pick on it. But again, who cares about the picks because we've already nailed multiple starters, and now you get Hendon Hooker with the deep ball accuracy. We know about the athleticism, but I think the consistency in his passing technique. I would like to see him throw with a little bit different velocity at times. No one to speed it up. No one to put a little bit more gas on the ball. Maybe be a little bit more less robotic in terms of some of his anticipation throws. Like when he sees a guy with a step and he puts it out there. the accuracy is beautiful, but the anticipation, it's like, well, maybe you could throw him away from the coverage a little bit more. It was a simplified scheme. It's going to take some time, but he's a very smart player from what I've heard. He mastered that offense, doesn't throw the ball when the defender has leverage. He protects the football in that sense, even though he has a couple of fumbles that I don't love. He protects the ball in that sense, and he also has that pocket elusiveness. I love me some Hendon Hooker, and the fact that you got him at round 3 is absolutely insane. I also love me some Jared Goff, and I believe we're going to win the whole dang thing with Jared Goff. But there's nothing wrong with taking a really good football player that just keeps falling for some reason. Take him, because there is a drop-off after that man. Broderick Martin out of Western Kentucky. Chat, if you guys were in there live, you saw my reaction to this, man. I was pumped. I was pumped, man, because this was a guy that I had just watched a few days before and finished doing not a full report on him, but feeling pretty good about him to put him on my big board, right? I want to feel good about players to put him on a board and really get a sense. Other guys I just left off. He was the guy I felt pretty good about, went through 4 or 5 of his games, really liked how he played against Indiana, and when I saw that name, I was like, oh my goodness, I love this pick. So first off, the Lions traded up, gave up that 4th round pick to go into the 3rd round, and on top of that, you gave up 2 more day 2 picks. When we did the trade value chart, as long as my math was correct, we actually won that trade in terms of the point system. But again, it's about the player. And I'm going to be honest, defensive tackle, we came in, I said, I think that is our biggest, most glaring need. If there was a spot to point to, that is the need for the Detroit Lions. And when I started looking at my board, Zach Pickens went at the top of round 3. When I was looking at who's available, I mean, maybe they would take a guy like Adetomiwa out of Northwestern, but even him at his size, a guy that I don't even know if teams are going to look at him as a defensive tackle. I'm telling you, my top players that were remaining at the defensive tackle position were all basically either undersized defensive tackles, or to me, they were clearly day 3 types of players. Except for a guy named Broderick Martin, man. He caught my attention so fast when I was watching him. 6'4.5", 330 pounds is what he weighed in at. And man, he just grabs your attention so fast. I hear, oh, he's a space eater. Look, all right, from what I've seen of this player, I'm so excited about this. And this is just a Brad Holmes pick through and through. What has he told us about defensive linemen? He wants pass rush upside, right? You got to be able to stop the run, right? Because they have it on the wall. You have to earn the right to rush the passer. But to get pass rush upside, he wants length and quickness. And to me, Broderick Martin absolutely checks those boxes. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, first off, length. He's got 35-inch arms. It's not normal for a guy that basically plays nose tackle. Now, to that, he's versatile. The guy's played defensive end in the past, but he's played A-gap, B-gap, almost split them evenly, down the road. And for our defense, we saw that last year, the versatility is very important to be able to shade as a 2-eye and play the 3-tech like we did last year with our defensive tackles. So that is important. But when I speak to the quickness sense, it's the ability to consistently be the first guy off the line of scrimmage into the pads of an offensive lineman. And when you tie that, you continue to clean up the hands and the hand usage. The ability to win and live at or behind of the line of scrimmage is just going to be what he's all known about. He gets his hands on you first a lot of times. It's a very good first step reaction off the snap, kind of the opposite of a guy like a Jervin Dexter out of Florida. His ability to get onto an offensive line with that length and just lock out, I mean, you can see him just stall out offensive lineman, and he's just going to live right there behind the line of scrimmage. That quickness is that reaction time. Now, his explosiveness, his ability to put pressure on offensive linemen in pass sets, right, that's not something that I think he's necessarily going to bring, and he's not going to be a 3rd down player to me at this point in time from what I've seen so far. That's not necessarily what he is, but against the run, to get quick wins. Similarly to a guy like Isaiah Buggs, when he gets pass rush, a lot of times it's quick wins. It's quick hands, it's getting your chest, it's push-pull, it's swim moves. The recognition from this player, and you saw that, the awareness to when to be able to utilize his swim move and work himself over top to get those instant wins. He had recognition of the block scheme that was coming towards him. That was something that was very noticeable. Now, his size and his height can be a little bit of an issue for trying to sink and hold his ground consistently. I view him a little bit more as a shade nose tackle that's shown some flexibility, but because of the quickness, the length, I really liked his ability to stop the run. I had him graded as a good run defender, below average pass rusher, because because the ability to consistently create walk back and leverage is something that's lacking, but he will give you those quick wins. And you did see it against Indiana. If he gets his hands in your chest, while the walk back and leverage haven't been consistent, he can really control the rep from there on because he completely locks out, and it's very difficult for an offensive center who usually has very short arms to reset and gain control, which leads to more pass rush upside than I think we've even seen to this point. I absolutely loved this pick for the Detroit Lions. Ali McNeil can continue to cut a little bit, stay in the role that he moved to last season where he became even more productive, playing a little bit more as a 3-tech for us. Now we have a nose tackle that can rotate with the Isaiah Buggs that's already shown the versatility, and then also you throw a guy like Benito Jones into that mix. He fits into the style of defensive lineman that we have. He has some fluidity to him to work loops, stunts, which I think goes to some of that defensive end and the ability to play that. He's a transfer from North Alabama that's a little bit of an older prospect, but I think when you're looking at where the board was at, this is a player that should absolutely not be slept on. He may be, I can't say he's my favorite pick because, man, that Brian Branch one is absolutely disgusting. That guy could change trajectory for the Detroit Lions in day 2, but this is the type of player, man, that I feel like was getting massively overlooked. I really liked him. This is not something that I had to talk myself into or something that I thought, well, after we took him, I really like it. I loved it immediately. Go check out my reaction. I knew exactly who this dude was when the Lions took him, and I was like, yes, I love this draft pick because he fits into exactly what Brad Holmes says he's always looking for that position. And it was getting light pretty quickly. You're going to get a guy that can help you this season comfortably, like you confidently can believe he's going to help you this year in any way. It was getting kind of light. It was getting kind of light in that sense. Or you were going with a guy that was maybe way undersized and you were like, oh, we might be able to get him in there if we bulk him up a little bit. This guy can play that role, and he's played multiple roles. I love me some Broderick Martin. I love how the Lions have handled this draft up to this point. My full recap will be on Bleacher Report after the draft tomorrow, but I have loved the Lions draft to this point, man. So if you're wondering how I feel about it, I love it. And we'll be live tomorrow for day number 3. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, for watching, and I'm out.